Take a moment and picture the American landscape in the summer of 1947. The Great War is finally over. The soldiers, the sailors, the airmen, the celebrated greatest generation have come home. There is a palpable sense of relief, of profound, hard-won optimism, of a nation shaking off the grime of global conflict and getting back to the business of life. It's a world that exists for us now mostly in black and white photographs. A world of big band music crooning from the dashboards of chrome-laden automobiles, of families gathering around hulking radios to listen to The Shadow and the Jack Benny program. It's a world of nascent suburbs, of burgeoning prosperity, of a future that seemed, for the first time in a long while, bright and limitless. It's a world that feels, from our modern, cynical perspective, simpler, more innocent. But beneath that placid Rockwellian surface, a new kind of anxiety was beginning to fester. A low-grade fever that would soon consume the globe. The Second World War had not brought lasting peace, but had instead given birth to a new, colder, and in some ways more terrifying conflict. The shadow of the Soviet Union, once a wartime ally, now loomed large and menacing over a fractured Europe. The terrifying new reality of the atomic bomb had forever changed our planet's psychological landscape, introducing the concept of instantaneous, global annihilation into our collective consciousness. It was a time of immense cognitive dissonance, a nation celebrating peace while its leaders were quietly preparing for the next, inevitable war. It was in this unique and volatile moment in history, a moment caught precariously between post-war euphoria and the dawn of Cold War paranoia, that something happened in the vast, empty and sun-scorched high desert of New Mexico. Something that would, over the ensuing decades, grow from a strange and quickly dismissed local news story into the single most famous, most debated, and most foundational event in the entire sprawling history of the UFO phenomenon. It is an event that has transcended mere historical curiosity and has become a kind of modern myth, a story that almost everyone in the Western world knows, at least in its broadest, most sensational strokes. It is a story of a crashed flying saucer, of alien bodies recovered from the wreckage, and of a massive ongoing government cover-up to hide the truth from the public. It is, of course, the story of the Roswell incident. For more than 75 years, the word Roswell has been more than just the name of a small city in New Mexico. It has become a cultural touchstone, a shorthand for the belief that we are not alone in the universe, and that our own government is hiding the single greatest secret in human history. The story has spawned countless books, television shows, documentaries, and blockbuster movies. It has fueled a vibrant and lucrative cottage industry of tourism in a town that would otherwise be unremarkable. And it has become the central pillar, the foundational text, of a belief system that has captivated and polarized millions. But tonight, we are not going to simply retell the familiar, sensational story of little gray men and a government conspiracy. We are going to do something different, something more challenging. We are going to become investigators. We are going to don the historian's tweed jacket and the detective's trench coat. We will meticulously peel back the thick, hardened layers of myth, folklore, and outright fabrication that have accumulated over the decades. We are going to look at this story not as believers or as debunkers, but as forensic historians, examining the evidence as it was first reported, and then tracing the strange, fascinating, and often contradictory evolution of the narrative itself. Our investigation will lead us deep into the world of top-secret military projects and the high-stakes espionage of the early Cold War. We will pore over the details of the official declassified Air Force report and a highly classified, ingenious, and almost forgotten program known by the codename Project Mogul. We will examine the witnesses, the timeline, the physical evidence, and the psychological context of the era. And we will relentlessly ask the crucial question: what really happened in the desert outside Roswell in July of 1947? Was it, as the United States government has long maintained, the unfortunate and misunderstood crash of a secret high-altitude surveillance balloon? Or was it, as so many witnesses have passionately claimed, something else entirely? Something not of this world. This is a story of a crashed object, a changing narrative, a secret project, and a potential UFO cover-up. And it all begins, as so many strange tales do, with a dark and stormy night. Part 1. A storm in the desert, a rancher's discovery. Our story begins in early July 1947, on a remote and sprawling sheep and cattle ranch about 75 miles northwest of the town of Roswell, New Mexico. The ranch, known as the Foster Ranch, was managed by a man named William Mac Brazel. Mac Brazel was the quintessential man of the land. He was not a scientist or an intellectual. He was a rancher, his life dictated by the unforgiving rhythms of the seasons and the often violent weather of the high desert. The land he worked was vast, arid, and sparsely populated, a place where the sky felt immense and the works of man seemed small and insignificant. On the evening of July 2nd, or 3 accounts from the time vary on the exact date, a powerful thunderstorm, a classic summer monsoon storm, rolled across the region. The storm was accompanied by intense, dramatic lightning that lit up the landscape, loud claps of thunder that echoed across the plains, and, as Mac Brazel would later recall, a strange, explosive sound that he felt was distinct from the thunder. It was, he said, a loud crash, an unusual noise even for a violent storm. He paid it some mind, but with livestock to protect, he had more immediate concerns. The next morning, as Mac and a young boy named D. Proctor, the 7-year-old son of a neighbor, were out on horseback checking on their sheep after the storm, they came across something highly unusual. Scattered across a patch of the pasture, over an area that Brazel later estimated to be roughly 3/4 of a mile long and several hundred feet wide, was a field of debris. This was not something Mac Brazel recognized. He was a man intimately familiar with his environment. He knew the look of a downed weather balloon. He knew the refuse of passing aircraft. He knew the detritus of rural life. This was different. He would later describe the debris as a collection of strange and remarkably lightweight materials. There were numerous strips of a tough, rubber-like substance, grayish-black in color. There were pieces of a thin metallic foil, similar in appearance to tin foil or the lead foil from a cigarette packet, but with a bizarre and memorable physical property. As he and others would famously describe it, when you crumpled a piece of it up in your hand, it would unfold itself, returning almost instantly to its original shape without any visible creases or wrinkles. It was in essence a form of memory metal. There were also numerous small, lightweight beams, similar in feel to balsa wood but, according to Brazel, impossible to break or whittle with a knife. Some of these beams, according to the very earliest accounts, had strange markings on them, described as resembling hieroglyphics or geometric symbols. These markings were faint, in shades of pink, purple, or lavender. There was also a great deal of a tough, parchment-like material and bits of a very strong fibrous tape, which also appeared to have these strange, floral or geometric patterns on it. Crucially, there was no sign of a larger craft, no motor, no propellers, no large pieces of metal, just this field of lightweight scattered wreckage. Intrigued and deeply puzzled, Brazel gathered some of the more interesting pieces of the material, stashed them under some brush to collect later, and went about his work. A few days passed. On Saturday, July 5th, he drove into the nearby town of Corona, a small outpost with a general store and a bar. He showed the debris to a few local acquaintances, who were equally baffled by its properties. The consensus among his friends was that he might have found something important, perhaps something military, and that he should report it to the proper authorities. The following day, Sunday, July 6th, Mac Brazel loaded some of the debris into his pickup truck and made the long, dusty 75-mile drive into the larger town of Roswell. He went directly to the office of the Chavez County Sheriff, a man named George Wilcox. He told the sheriff his story and showed him a piece of the strange self-restoring foil. Sheriff Wilcox, like everyone else who had seen the material, was unsure of what to make of it. He handled the material, noted its strangeness, and decided that this was a matter for the military. He placed a call to Roswell Army Airfield, which was, at that time, one of the most important and sensitive military installations in the world. Roswell Army Airfield was home to the 509th Bombardment Group. This was not just any air base, and the 509th was not just any unit. They were the tip of the spear of American military power. They were the only atomic bomb-capable squadron on the planet. They were the elite unit that had dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki just 2 years earlier, effectively ending World War II. The base was accustomed to dealing with top-secret technology and matters of the highest national security. If anyone could identify strange material found in the desert, it was the men of the 509th. The call from Sheriff Wilcox was routed to the base's intelligence officer, Major Jesse A. Marcel. Marcel was a highly respected officer, a veteran pilot with a distinguished combat record in the Pacific Theater, where he had been awarded 5 air medals for shooting down enemy aircraft. He was not a man prone to fantasy or exaggeration. He was a serious, sober-minded intelligence officer. He took the call from the sheriff and his interest was piqued. He drove into town, met with Brazel at the sheriff's office, and interviewed him about the discovery. After examining the material Brazel had brought with him, Marcel decided the matter was serious enough to investigate further. He told Brazel to keep quiet about the discovery, and that he would accompany him back to the ranch to see the debris field for himself. Later that day, Marcel, accompanied by another officer, Captain Sheridan Cavett of the Counterintelligence Corps, drove out to the ranch with Mac Brazel. The drive was long, and they arrived late in the afternoon. When they reached the debris field, Marcel was, by his own later account, astounded. "Something I had never seen before and I'll never see again," he would say in interviews decades later. He described the vastness of the debris field, which he said was much larger than Brazel had indicated, and he was captivated by the bizarre properties of the material itself. He described the memory foil, the unbreakable I-beams, and the strange hieroglyphic symbols. He spent hours gathering up as much of it as he could, filling the trunk and back seat of his Buick staff car and a Jeep. He was convinced, he later said, that what he had found was not of this world. It was nothing man-made. On the long drive back to the base late that night, Marcel made a fateful and highly unusual decision. He was so excited and overwhelmed by the discovery that he didn't drive straight back to the base. Instead, he made a detour. He stopped at his own home on the base to wake up his wife and his 11-year-old son, Jesse Marcel Jr. He spread some of the strange wreckage out on the kitchen floor and showed it to his family. He wanted them to see a piece of history. It was a moment that would change the course of his son's life forever. Jesse Marcel Jr. would vividly recall that night for the rest of his life, remembering the strange feel of the metallic debris and the sight of the I-beams with their cryptic, purplish symbols. Part 2: The Flash, the Retraction, and the Photographs. The next morning, Monday, July 7th, Major Marcel brought the collected debris to his commanding officer, Colonel William Butch Blanchard. Blanchard was the commander of the 509th Bomb Group, a man known for his decisive and no-nonsense leadership. He examined the material and, according to Marcel, immediately recognized its significance and peculiarity. He ordered the debris field on the Brazel Ranch to be sealed off by military police. He also made a series of calls up the chain of command, reporting the unusual find. The next stop for the debris would be the headquarters of the 8th Air Force in Fort Worth, Texas, for further analysis by higher-ranking experts. But then, Colonel Blanchard made a truly extraordinary decision. He instructed the base's public information officer, a young first lieutenant named Walter Oates, to issue a press release about the discovery. This was a highly unusual move. The military, especially an elite unit like the 509th, was not in the habit of issuing press releases about strange debris found in the desert. Standard procedure would have been to maintain strict secrecy while the object was identified. Blanchard's decision to go public remains one of the most puzzling aspects of the entire affair. Was it a moment of genuine excitement and belief? Was it a calculated move to gauge public reaction? Or was it a monumental blunder? Whatever the reason, on the morning of Tuesday, July 8, 1947, Walter Oates typed up a short, stunning press release. After it was personally approved by Colonel Blanchard, Oates delivered it to the two local radio stations, KGFL and KSWS, and the two local newspapers, the Roswell Daily Record and the Roswell Morning Dispatch. The press release began with the now legendary words that would echo through history. The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers and the sheriff's office of Chavez County. The story was an immediate and explosive sensation. It was picked up by the Associated Press and the United Press wire services and flashed across the country and around the world. The Roswell Daily Record, in its afternoon edition, ran a massive banner headline, the kind usually reserved for the end of a war. RAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. For a few brief, electrifying hours, it seemed that the mystery of the flying saucers, a term that had only entered the public lexicon a few weeks earlier after a private pilot named Kenneth Arnold reported seeing a series of 9 fast-moving, crescent-shaped objects over Washington's Mount Rainier, had been solved. The United States military had one in its possession. But then, just as quickly and dramatically as the story had appeared, the military slammed on the brakes and threw the entire operation into reverse. The debris was loaded onto a B-29 Super Fortress and flown from Roswell to the headquarters of the 8th Air Force at Carswell Army Air Field in Fort Worth, Texas. The material was met on the tarmac and taken directly to the office of the commanding general of the 8th Air Force, Brigadier General Roger M. Ramey. A few hours later, General Ramey called a press conference in his office. He announced to the assembled reporters and photographers that the entire thing had been a colossal mistake. The personnel at Roswell, he explained with a tone of paternalistic amusement, had gotten a little overexcited. The debris that had been recovered, he clarified, was not a flying disc at all. It was simply the wreckage of a common high-altitude weather balloon and its radar reflector, a device known as a Raywin target. To prove his point, he had some of the debris laid out on the floor of his office for the photographers to see. The photographs that were taken that day in General Ramey's office have become some of the most analyzed images in the history of ufology. They show General Ramey and his chief of staff, Colonel Thomas Dubose, kneeling on the floor and holding up pieces of what looks like a shattered, kite-like object made of foil, sticks, and rubber. Major Jesse Marcel was also present at the press conference, and he was ordered by Ramey to pose for pictures with the debris. He looks, in those famous photos, deeply uncomfortable, almost sullen. He is a man clearly being forced to participate in a charade. Marcel would later claim, vehemently and consistently, that the material displayed in General Ramey's office was not the same material he had recovered from the desert. It was a switch, he insisted. The real exotic debris had been taken away into a back room, and this mundane weather balloon wreckage was brought out as a substitute for the press. He had been ordered by General Ramey to keep his mouth shut and go along with the new story. The press, for the most part, accepted the official explanation without question. The next day's newspapers ran stories retracting the flying saucer claim. The Roswell Daily Record's headline now read, "General Ramey empties Roswell saucer." The story died a swift and unceremonious death. Mac Brazel, the rancher who had started it all, was reportedly held by the military for several days at the base guest house. He was intensively debriefed. When he was finally released, he gave a new, heavily revised interview to the press, an interview in which he seemed deeply uncomfortable and coached. He said he was sorry for all the trouble he had caused, that he had seen weather balloons before but this one looked a little different, and that he was sure the military was right. He said he never wanted to see or hear about the stuff again. The Roswell incident faded from public memory, becoming little more than a historical footnote, a brief and slightly embarrassing moment of flying saucer fever in the summer of '47. And there, for 30 long years, the story lay dormant, buried under the official explanation and the weight of time. Part 3. The Long Silence and the Resurrection. For 3 decades the world moved on. The Cold War intensified into a global ideological struggle. The space race began, sending satellites, animals, and eventually men into the cosmos. The UFO phenomenon continued to evolve, with new sightings, new government studies like Project Blue Book, and new theories. But the Roswell story was largely forgotten, a dead-end case. The key players scattered. Jesse Marcel continued his military career, eventually retiring as a lieutenant colonel. Mac Brazel passed away in 1963, taking whatever secrets he held to the grave. The Roswell Army Airfield was renamed Walker Air Force Base and eventually closed in 1967. The story seemed destined to remain a curious but unimportant footnote. That all changed in the late 1970s. The catalyst for its resurrection was a determined and tenacious nuclear physicist and UFO researcher named Stanton T. Friedman. Friedman had become convinced that some UFO sightings represented genuine extraterrestrial craft, and that the government was engaged in a cover-up. He approached the subject with scientific rigor, spending countless hours in archives and tracking down old witnesses. While conducting research, Friedman came across a mention of the 1947 Roswell flying disc story and the name of the intelligence officer involved, Jesse Marcel. Friedman, a skilled investigator, managed to track Marcel down in 1978. The former intelligence officer was now retired and living a quiet life in Houma, Louisiana. And after 30 years of silence, he was ready to talk. In a series of tape-recorded interviews, Marcel, for the first time, told his full unvarnished story publicly. He vehemently denied the weather balloon explanation, calling it a sad story. He described with passion and conviction the incredible unearthly properties of the debris he had found, the super-strong I-beams that couldn't be dented or burned, the parchment-like material, the memory foil that wouldn't crease, and the strange hieroglyphic-like symbols. He insisted that he had been personally ordered by General Ramey to go along with the cover story, and that he had been made a fool of, used as a pawn to deceive the press and the public. "It was not anything from this earth," he stated, his voice firm. "That I'm damn sure of. It was not a weather balloon, or a weather-gathering device of any kind." Stanton Friedman was electrified. Here was a high-ranking, credible first-hand witness, the man who had actually recovered the material, claiming on the record that the official story was a lie. This was the smoking gun he had been looking for. Friedman's investigation kicked into high gear. He began searching for other witnesses from 1947. He found Walter Oates, the public information officer who had written the original press release. Oates confirmed that he had been ordered to write it by his commanding officer, Colonel Blanchard, and that he believed Blanchard was convinced the object was extraterrestrial. Friedman found Jesse Marcel Jr., now a respected physician and flight surgeon in the National Guard, who vividly recalled his father showing him the strange debris on that fateful night in 1947. He too insisted it was nothing like a weather balloon. In 1980, Stanton Friedman's groundbreaking research was featured in a sensational book titled The Roswell Incident, co-authored with the popular paranormal writer Charles Berlitz and ufologist William L. Moore. The book was a massive bestseller. It brought the story of Roswell roaring back into the public consciousness, but this time, it was a completely different story. It was no longer just about a crashed object. It was about a vast and sinister UFO cover-up. The book presented the powerful testimony of Jesse Marcel, and others as definitive proof that the United States military had recovered an alien spacecraft in 1947 and had been lying about it ever since. The publication of the Roswell incident opened the floodgates. It was as if a dam had broken. Over the next decade and a half, a flood of new, often sensational witnesses emerged, their memories supposedly jogged by the new publicity surrounding the case. The story began to grow and mutate, becoming more elaborate, more detailed, and more spectacular with each new telling. New witnesses like retired Master Sergeant Louis Bill Rickett, who had worked at the base, came forward to corroborate Marcel's account of the strange materials. But other witnesses took the story much further. They claimed there hadn't been just one crash site but two. The debris field found by Mac Brazel was merely what had exploded off the main craft in the air. Several miles away, the main body of the craft itself, the command module, had crashed into the plains of San Agustin, its alien crew still inside. A local mortician from the Ballard Funeral Home, a man named Glenn Dennis, came forward with one of the most compelling and disturbing stories. In a series of interviews, Dennis claimed that on the day of the crash, he had received several strange calls from the mortuary officer at the Roswell base. The officer was asking for information about the availability of child-sized, hermetically sealed caskets and for advice on how to handle and preserve bodies that had been exposed to the elements for several days. Later that day, Dennis claimed, he went to the base hospital to deliver a patient and ran into a frantic nurse he knew. The nurse, whose identity he promised to protect, allegedly told him a shocking story. She described having assisted in a preliminary autopsy of several small, non-human bodies that had been recovered from the crash site. She drew sketches of the beings for him on a napkin. Small, frail bodies, disproportionately large heads, large, dark, almond-shaped eyes, and small slits for a nose and mouth. Dennis also claimed to have seen strange, metallic wreckage in the back of a military ambulance at the base, and to have been physically threatened by a red-haired military captain and an African-American sergeant to keep quiet about what he had seen and heard. Another key witness to emerge in the early 1990s was a man named Frank Kaufman, who claimed to have been a member of a special military unit tasked with securing the main crash site. His story was incredibly detailed. He described a delta-winged craft, about 30 feet long, embedded in the earth. He described seeing the bodies of the alien occupants. Other witnesses, like retired Brigadier General Arthur Exon, who was a lieutenant colonel at Wright Field in 1947, claimed to have heard high-level whispers about the crash and to have flown over the crash sites. He said it was common knowledge among the senior staff at Wright Field that an extraterrestrial craft had been recovered. By the early 1990s, the Roswell narrative had transformed from a simple story of strange debris into a sprawling, complex mythology. It was now a story of two crash sites, a recovered alien craft, multiple alien bodies, a secret military autopsy, and a massive ongoing cover-up orchestrated at the highest levels of the U.S. government. The story proposed that the wreckage and the alien bodies had been secretly transported from Roswell to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, the Air Force's main foreign technology analysis center. From there, the story went. The artifacts were eventually moved to the mysterious and highly secure facility in the Nevada desert that was becoming known to the public as Area 51. The pressure on the government to respond to these increasingly detailed and serious allegations became immense. The story was no longer a fringe belief. It was a mainstream cultural phenomenon, the subject of popular TV shows like Unsolved Mysteries. New Mexico's own Congressman Stephen Schiff launched his own inquiry through the General Accounting Office (GAO), demanding answers from the Department of Defense. Faced with a barrage of Freedom of Information Act requests and congressional pressure, the United States Air Force decided it was time to finally and officially address the Roswell case once and for all. They opened their archives and launched a comprehensive top-to-bottom investigation to find out what really happened. Part 4. The official explanation: The secret of Project Mogul. In July of 1994, after a painstaking year-long search of its archives, the United States Air Force released its definitive report on the Roswell incident. The report was over 1,000 pages long and was titled The Roswell Report: Fact versus Fiction in the New Mexico Desert. The conclusion was unequivocal, and for many deeply disappointing. The object that crashed near Roswell in 1947 was not an alien spacecraft. The report, however, did contain a bombshell admission. It confirmed that the weather balloon story told by General Ramey in 1947 was in fact a lie. It was a cover story, but it wasn't covering up a flying saucer. It was covering up something else, something so secret that its existence couldn't be acknowledged for nearly 50 years. It was covering up a top-secret military program known by the codename Project Mogul. So what exactly was Project Mogul? To understand it, we have to immerse ourselves again in the paranoid atmosphere of the dawn of the Cold War. In 1947, the United States had a monopoly on the atomic bomb, but its leaders knew that this monopoly wouldn't last. The number one highest priority for U.S. intelligence was to determine when the Soviet Union would conduct its first atomic test. The problem was the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin was a vast, closed totalitarian society, a black box that was nearly impossible to penetrate with traditional espionage. A team of brilliant American scientists, led by a geophysicist from Columbia University named Dr. Maurice Ewing, came up with a radical and ingenious solution. Ewing had theorized and later proven the existence of a special layer in the upper atmosphere, an atmospheric equivalent of the deep ocean's SOFAR channel, sound fixing and ranging. This channel, located in the tropopause at an altitude of around 40,000 to 50,000 feet, had unique temperature and pressure properties that could trap low-frequency sound waves and carry them for thousands of miles with very little signal loss. The theory was that if you could place a sensitive microphone at that precise altitude, you could potentially hear the sound of a Soviet nuclear test from the other side of the world. It was a brilliant, innovative, and highly audacious idea. This theory gave birth to Project Mogul. It was a top-secret, high-priority project run by the Army Air Forces. The goal was to develop a system to lift a heavy payload of sensitive acoustic equipment, radar targets, and radio telemetry gear to a constant, high altitude and keep it there for an extended period. The only technology available at the time to accomplish this was balloons. But these were not ordinary single-weather balloons. A Project Mogul balloon array was a bizarre and gargantuan creation, unlike anything seen before. It consisted of a long train of multiple neoprene meteorological balloons, sometimes more than 20 of them, strung together vertically like a giant string of pearls. The entire array, when launched, could stretch over 600 feet from top to bottom. Suspended beneath this long chain of balloons was the payload, a collection of instruments, heavy batteries, radio transmitters, and crucially for the Roswell story, several large, kite-like radar reflectors. These reflectors were essential to allow the ground crews to track the massive, high-altitude arrays. And here is where the details become critically important. The Air Force report revealed that these radar reflectors were constructed by a toy company, the Ideal Toy Company in New York, a company best known for making dolls. They were made of lightweight balsa wood sticks, metallic foil paper, and a special kind of reinforced fibrous tape. This tape, according to declassified project documents and the testimony of the project's own scientists, was manufactured by a different company and had a floral or geometric pattern on it, a result of the manufacturing process. The Air Force report meticulously documented the history of Project Mogul. It showed that in June and early July of 1947, a series of these massive balloon arrays were launched from the Alamogordo Army Airfield in New Mexico, not far from the Foster Ranch where Mac Brazel found the debris. The report's investigators were able to identify one particular launch, designated Flight Number 4, which was launched on June 4, 1947. According to the project's own logs, Ground tracking of Flight Number 4 was lost on that same day, with its last known position being approximately 17 miles from the Brazel Ranch debris field. The Air Force concluded with a high degree of certainty that the debris Mac Brazel found in early July was the wreckage of this specific, lost Project Mogul balloon array. This explanation at first glance seems to account for many of the strange and specific details of the original story with remarkable precision. The sheer amount of debris scattered over a wide area is perfectly consistent with the 600-foot-long balloon train disintegrating in a storm. The lightweight beams that couldn't be broken or burned sound very much like the balsa wood sticks of the radar targets, which would have been fire retardant. The fibrous tape with strange markings is a stunning match for the description of the floral pattern tape used on the radar reflectors. The tough, rubber-like strips are consistent with the tough, weathered neoprene of the multiple balloons. And what about the famous memory foil? The report suggests this was likely the foil paper from the radar reflectors. While it did not possess any magical self-restoring properties, it was a novel material to a rancher in 1947, and its properties could easily have been exaggerated or misremembered over the decades. The so-called hieroglyphics were almost certainly the floral patterns on the tape. The Mogul hypothesis also provides a powerful and entirely logical motive for the cover-up. In 1947, Project Mogul was one of the nation's most sensitive and important intelligence-gathering operations. The very fact that the U.S. was developing a method to spy on Soviet nuclear tests was a state secret of the highest order. When Major Marcel brought the wreckage to the Roswell base, the officers who were read in on Mogul would have immediately recognized what it was and realized they had a serious security problem. They couldn't tell the public or the press the truth. So they came up with a simple, believable, and low-level cover story that would kill the story quickly. It was a weather balloon. This explanation successfully concealed the true top-secret nature of the project from the American public and, more importantly, from Soviet intelligence. It was a classic UFO cover-up, but it was covering up a top-secret terrestrial military project, not an extraterrestrial one. The 1994 Air Force report was a detailed, well-researched, and compelling piece of work. For many people, including many former UFO believers, it closed the book on Roswell. It was the aha moment, the missing piece of the puzzle that made everything else make sense. But for the hardcore believers, it was just another layer of the cover-up, a more sophisticated lie designed to discredit the growing body of witness testimony. They pointed to the flaws in the report. What about the bodies? The 1994 report didn't address them at all. This led to a second, final Air Force report, released in 1997 to coincide with the 50th anniversary of the event. This one was titled The Roswell Report. Case closed. This report was specifically tasked with investigating the claims of recovered alien bodies. The Air Force's explanation for these stories was grim, a little macabre, but entirely terrestrial. They argued that the stories of alien bodies were a complex and confused amalgamation of several different, unrelated events, jumbled together by the passage of time and the power of suggestion. The primary source of the bodies' stories, the report suggested, was the collective, distorted memory of accidents involving high-altitude test dummies. In the 1950s, years after the Roswell incident, the Air Force conducted a series of projects, like Project High Dive and Project Excelsior, in which anthropomorphic dummies were dropped from high-altitude balloons over the New Mexico desert to test parachute systems and the effects of high-altitude ejection. These dummies were bald, had a chalky white or silvery appearance, lacked distinct facial features, and would have looked deeply strange and unsettling to any civilian who might have stumbled upon them in the desert. The Air Force argued that over the decades, the memories of these dummy drops had become compressed and conflated with the original Roswell crash story, creating a new false narrative of recovered alien bodies from the 1947 crash. They supported this with a timeline showing that the most detailed body stories began to emerge in the public consciousness at the same time that information about these once-secret dummy tests was being declassified. The Case Closed report also systematically and brutally deconstructed the testimony of some of the most sensational witnesses. It pointed out that Glenn Dennis, the mortician, had changed key details of his story multiple times over the years, including the name of the nurse who had supposedly told him about the autopsies. Investigators were never able to identify or locate this nurse, and her existence remains unproven. The report also thoroughly discredited Frank Kaufman, showing that his military records did not support his claims of being part of a special unit, and that many of his stories were demonstrably false. The Air Force's final conclusion was blunt and uncompromising. There was no evidence of any kind that an extraterrestrial craft or extraterrestrial beings were involved in the Roswell incident. The debris was from Project Mogul. The body stories were a mixture of hoaxes and misidentified memories of crashed test dummies. The case, as far as the United States government was concerned, was well and truly closed. Part 5. An enduring mystery and a cultural obsession. So where does that leave us, the intrepid investigators of this 75-year-old mystery? We are left with two powerful, compelling, and mutually exclusive narratives. On one side, we have the official Air Force report, backed by thousands of pages of declassified documents, the historical context of the Cold War, and the direct testimony of some of the actual scientists who worked on Project Mogul. It presents a coherent, logical, and entirely terrestrial explanation for the events of 1947. It's a story of Cold War secrecy, of a top-secret surveillance project gone awry, and of a necessary and ultimately successful cover story that inadvertently gave birth to the greatest UFO legend of all time. It's a tidy, rational, and for some deeply satisfying explanation. On the other side, we have the extraterrestrial hypothesis. This narrative is supported by the powerful, emotional, and seemingly unshakable testimony of first-hand witnesses like Major Jesse Marcel and his son. It is bolstered by the dozens of other witnesses who came forward later, adding layers of detail and drama to the story. It's a narrative that speaks to a deep human longing for connection, for awe, for proof that we are not alone in the vast, cold emptiness of the cosmos. It paints a picture of a government that cannot be trusted, a government that is hiding a world-changing, paradigm-shifting truth from its own people. Let's try to weigh the evidence as objectively as we can. The Project Mogul explanation is powerful. It is not a simple weather balloon theory. It is a specific, complex, and verifiable explanation that accounts for the timing, the location, and many of the physical descriptions of the debris with an almost uncanny accuracy. Charles B. Moore, one of the original Project Mogul scientists, examined the descriptions of the Roswell debris provided by the witnesses and stated that they were a perfect match for the materials used in a Mogul array, particularly the radar targets. The motive for the cover-up is also strong and entirely logical within the paranoid context of the Cold War. However, there are still nagging questions, loose threads that the Mogul theory doesn't perfectly answer, at least for the skeptics. The primary one remains the powerful testimony of Major Jesse Marcel. Why would a decorated intelligence officer, a man who dedicated his life to the military and to his country, risk his reputation and his legacy to insist, until the day he died, that the material he found was otherworldly? Was he simply mistaken? Was he a man of limited scientific knowledge who was easily impressed by novel materials? Was his memory hopelessly clouded and contaminated by the passage of 30 years? Or was he telling the truth as he knew it? And what of the most exotic properties, like the memory foil and the unbreakable beams with hieroglyphics? Can these be dismissed simply as the misremembering and exaggeration of novel but terrestrial materials? Proponents of the alien theory argue that these specific, bizarre properties are the core of the mystery, and that the Mogul explanation downplays them too easily and too conveniently. The witness testimony is both the greatest strength and the greatest weakness of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. The raw emotion in Jesse Marcel's voice when he describes the event in his taped interviews is palpable and convincing. However, a mountain of research in cognitive psychology has shown that human memory is a notoriously fallible and malleable thing. It is not a video recording that can be played back with perfect fidelity. It is a reconstructive process, highly susceptible to suggestion, contamination, and unconscious alteration over time. The fact that the vast majority of the most spectacular claims, the second crash site, the bodies, the autopsies, the threats from menacing government agents only emerged after the publication of the Roswell incident in 1980, more than 30 years after the event, is a massive red flag for any historian or critical investigator. It is a well-documented psychological phenomenon known as confabulation, where people can unconsciously create false but detailed memories, conflating what they actually saw or experienced with what they have since read, heard, or seen in movies. Ultimately, the Roswell incident may be a mystery that can never be definitively solved to everyone's satisfaction. It has become a kind of national inkblot test, a Rorschach test for the modern age. What you see in the ambiguous shapes of the Roswell story says as much about you, your faith in government, your belief in the possibility of extraterrestrial life, your interpretation of evidence and testimony as it does about the event itself. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the Roswell story is not what happened in that desert in 1947, but how the story itself has lived, breathed, and grown over the subsequent decades. It transformed from a minor, quickly debunked news item about a crashed disk into a complex, powerful, and enduring modern myth. It has become a cornerstone of American folklore, a tale of wonder, conspiracy, and the enduring, perhaps unquenchable, hope that there is something more out there, beyond the veil of our ordinary lives. Whether it was the crash of a top-secret spy balloon or the crash of a vehicle from another world, the events in the New Mexico desert in the summer of 1947 left a permanent mark on our culture, a question mark that continues to hang in the clear, silent desert air. And now, after this long and detailed investigation, I want to turn that final question over to you. Having heard the details of the initial reports from 1947, the dramatic evolution of the witness testimony, and the intricate, official explanation of Project Mogul, what do you believe? Do you find the Air Force report to be a convincing and logical explanation that neatly solves the Roswell incident? Or do you believe that the powerful testimony of key witnesses like Jesse Marcel points to a genuine UFO cover-up, a conspiracy that has successfully protected its secrets for over 75 years? What piece of evidence do you find most compelling, and what do you find most dubious? Let us know your thoughts, your theories, and your detailed analysis in the comments below. This is a story that thrives on critical thought, on debate, and on discussion. If you found this deep dive into one of history's most fascinating and enduring mysteries to be compelling, please consider showing your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more investigations into the stories that lie at the intersection of history, science, and the unexplained. And be sure to hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next journey into the shadows of the past. Thank you for listening.